All right, everybody, welcome to IEEE Pulse. We are doing our industry corner live, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Tom Oxley, CEO of Synchron. Tom, how are you today?
Good, Chad. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's last time we caught up was at JPM in January, right?
That cafe, breakfast cafe that everyone's waiting to get in the 7 in the morning.
Yeah, it was packed, and you did some amazing stuff that weekend, which I hope to get into a little bit. So, Tom, tell me about Synchron and everything about the Stentrode and where it all began.
So Synchron is a 15-year journey for me. We're building an implantable brain-computer interface. Kicked off first patent 2010, PhD for me started in 2012. I moved from Australia to the US in 2015 and then started raising capital in 2016. Clinical trials 2019 kicked off, first study in Australia, second study 2022, and now we're getting ready for a pivotal trial. Yeah, implantable brain computer interface. There's about 7 companies now, all built around the FDA's guidance document around implantable BCI. The first FDA guidance document outlines the use case, really defines an implantable BCI as a neuroprosthesis, focused on initially sensory and motor areas. But the way I think about it, BCI is it's been defined as that which can enable direct brain control of external devices, which enables restored level of some cortical function. But I think more broadly, like the definition is around a device that restores some level of cortical or brain function. So, moving, feeling, seeing, hearing, um, and then now there's kind of a growing extended definition that goes into other domains, but that's an area of contention in the field right now.
Well, I definitely want to get into that with you. You said that you started it in 2012 and moved incorporated or started fundraising 2015, 16. What were you researching? What was uh, the beginning of all of this?
The origin was that we first were funded through the US Defense Agency DARPA, and that program called Reliable Neural Interfaces was trying to develop a mechanism for reliable transmission of brain data. In that case, the use case was like more motor control for prosthetic robotic limbs.
Mm.
And now the field, that the first mover in the field was cyberkinetics. They raised, I think, about 30 million, 2007, 2008. I think it was a little bit ahead of its time because well, you couldn't go and buy a robotic limb from the corner store. And now all the companies are focused on control of widely available, powerful consumer devices like iPhone. Uh, so I think the world kind of was needing that level of consumer device to be able to be controlled by a brain first because it was chicken or the egg situation.
Mm.
So yeah, we submitted to DARPA a concept that, well, if you're going into the brain, if you look at the history of medicine, there really hasn't, it's been challenging to scale a technology that requires craniotomy. Or let's say going through bone. And in cardiac, it used to be going through the heart with an open thoracotomy, and that has shifted. You don't really get open heart surgery for bypass surgery, or you get a stent. You don't really get open heart surgery for a valve, or you still do, but valvular therapies have happened a lot through catheter, and that has scaled massively. So the origin story for Synchron was, if BCI takes off and if it works, then if you look at the history of medicine, the trend is towards minimally invasive procedures, particularly that can be delivered through the catheter in the cath lab. So we got some money from DARPA, and I didn't have a company at that point. I took the first million back to Australia and we started a lab. And I was starting
Mm.
my neurology training, and we had $1 million, and I met my co-founders at that point, and we started a research lab. And we set ourselves, don't cheat by going through the skull to get into the brain. How would you push an electrode through a catheter and deliver it for a period of a lifetime into a blood vessel that sits over a useful part of the brain.
Now that's so you took it back to Australia with $1 million in hand, and then you evolved out of that, coming back to the US at what point?
So that million turned into 5 million, turned into 15 million of government funding from Australian government, US defense,
Wow.
Australian defense. And we had a lab, and we published like 25 papers. We had a Nature biotechnology paper that was kind of the breakthrough moment for the lab. And I was trying to start a company. I had patents and I'd formed a company, but I couldn't raise any capital. We got a license from the University of Melbourne, and I was trying to raise capital from 2012 all the way through to 2016, basically. I
Oh,
moved to New York in 2015. Couldn't raise a cent in Australia, and I've got a list of all the people that said no. And then came to New York and raised the first financing within 6 months of moving to New York. So it's just a classic American dream story.
wow. No, the financing world and getting that money that's a grind. And you spent 4 years. What point in your life did you make that, or what decision were you at to make the bet on that, 4 years of not squandering, but waiting for that money to come? Where were you at emotionally on that level?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like we were lucky. We had very good government funding. We were spending a lot of our time writing grants, and we weren't waiting or dependent on the private capital to be, we weren't, it was all upside. We were running a research group, wanting to be academics and like answer interesting questions and do good science and, get published and make an impact. Um, so, and then I moved to New York, not like I moved to New York primarily to finish. I did a PhD and then I did stroke fellowship. And then I got a job doing interventional neurology or neurointervention, which is catheters up into the brain to treat stroke and aneurysms and, mechanical blood vessel problems, where I had an ambition to maybe use that as a pathway to deliver electronics up into the brain. So, it's not like everything happened in a graded way. So I moved
Mm,
to New York. I was running a fellowship, and then in the evenings, I was helping run the group back home. And then we got the Series A was like $3 million. And we used that to then build a first in human technology with a contract manufacturer in Minneapolis from
mm,
2016 through to 2019 before the clinical trials started. And so I was like doing that in my evenings because at like 6 p.m. New York time would be 9 a.m. Australia time. So I had like my daytime job, and then I had the night, and then I'd work in the nighttime. Um, and then over time, like as the company grew, my clinical role reduced over time. So it was so there wasn't like a moment where, you know what I mean? Like it was a sort
mm.
of graded change.
No, it's incredible. I think besides the lack of sleep, it sounds like what was the biggest turning point for you? What was the light bulb? This is something. This is working. This is now my new path moving forward.
So we had a few of those moments. I think the initial DARPA grant was obviously the origin story. Like when we were first trying to do this, there was no animal model for this, so we had to build a sheep model and like we had to
Mm,
figure out what catheters could get up into the blood vessels in the venous network in the brains of sheep. There was a moment where that was looking almost impossible, and then we figured that out. So that was a moment. Then there was the challenge of like pushing a electrode array up through a catheter all the way. It's like 125 centimeters of
wow.
distance you had to go up. So that was a moment that worked. And then there was the moment we had the first recordings from the brain. Yeah. And then I think by the time so Martin Deek was the first investor with a group called, introduced by now our chief medical officer and my very close mentor, Professor Jay Mocco at Mount Sinai. The moment that Martin Deek decided to fund the company, that was like I think I would have done 200 pitches up to that point and heard no in all sorts of different colors. So, if you're out there and you have an idea and you're pitching, it's you can hear no a lot, and you
Mm,
hear no from really smart people who know a lot and have seen a lot and give you really good reasons why what you're doing is not going to work. And you
mm.
have to like swallow them all and not quit and not stop and like use it as a way to like guide yourself forward. So when finally you do land the investment, you think it would be kind of ecstatic. It's actually just a relief. It's kind of like you're just pounding and pounding, and then it's like, oh, like, okay, maybe this might go somewhere.
Well, fundraising is funny like that, right? Where you think that the effort, you spend so much time fundraising, you hear the no's and you get your yes, and you think that's the win, but in a way, that's just the beginning. The funding starts, and then you've got to perform. So I'm sure that challenge was big for you guys. But when was your first human patient? I think you guys did OUS study first, and then you got to the US. Is that correct?
Yeah, so 2016 we got the first 3 million Series A financing. We took that to Minneapolis. Well, my team was in Australia, but we were managing a contract manufacturer in Minneapolis called Evergreen that was then purchased by Heraeus.
Yeah, know those guys.
Yeah, and that device took us 3 years to get that device built up and tested and approved. And then first human implant was Graham in 2019 in Australia. We did 4 patients in Melbourne, Australia.
That's great. And I love, our colliding worlds of being a minimally invasive technology and really shifting the paradigm from total surgical into something that's, percutaneous and or intravenous. So with with all that's going on in the US with BCI, who was the first to get to human studies on these commercial systems?
Yeah, so long history. There's like 30 years of work. Hatsopoulos in Chicago and Richard Anderson in Caltech and Nikolaos in Duke and many others that I'm not mentioning before the first. And then you've got the BrainGate program. So BlackRock Neuro through the BrainGate program have done, tens, like 30 patients or something. But the Utah array was always a component in a system that was pulled together, looked different in different institutions, and it was the institution that were putting forward the FDA and IRB requests for the trial. So, um, we when we submitted and got approval and then did our first implant in the US, it was the first company to have submitted to the FDA with a full stack system that was fully implantable, where the company had been given the IDE. So we were the first to do that, and then Neuralink have now been the second, and then
Mm,
there's another six companies preparing, getting ready.
no,
Paradromics
that's
Paradromics looks like they'll be next. They've been building their system for I think 10 years, and they're on the cusp of getting into human clinical.
yeah. So they're doing theirs for 10 years. Your journey's at 15 years.
We're,
Why does
we're
it
at,
take so
we're at,
long?
we're at 8 years. I think Neuralink took
Okay.
8 years, and we were at 8 years from getting started. So it's,
Okay.
8 to 10 years on average, has been the history so far. Maybe it gets faster, but why does it take so long? So between 2012 and 2016, so what's that? 2012 to 2019. Yeah, it was like, or 2011 to 2019. It's like that's the 8 years. So between the first half of that 4 years, we were building it was kind of like feasibility in an animal model. So before we can get financing to go and do a human study, you had to prove that you've got an idea. So we spent 4 years. Nick Opie, my co-founder, was hand building these devices himself, and then we'd figure out a way to show that it could be delivered through a catheter in the animal model, and then we had to publish the work. So for us, it like took that much time to prove out that you could deliver a technology, and that was enough to get the Series A financing. Got the Series A financing, Then you take the concept and you have to go through a process of building a human grade device. Now, it tends to be that, the highest quality manufacturers, or, Neuralink's example, they just went vertical integration from the very beginning, which is what Elon's done with his companies. He just, from the very beginning, builds up a whole manufacturing line, which is extremely expensive. Amazing. Would love to do that, but it's extremely expensive to do that. Most,
Sure.
most most people don't have the luxury. Most groups don't have the luxury of doing that. So you have to go to like a contract manufacturer. If it's the thing with the BCI, it's like hundreds to thousands of components with
Mm,
multiple. You've got an implant in the brain. We've got an electronics component that has communication protocol, Bluetooth, powering challenges. Then you've got an external system that does decoding, or maybe there's a bit of decoding on the internal system. Then it's going to control some piece of either software or hardware. So all the integrations with that, you probably have to build an app. So it's pretty unusual for a medical device to have that many layers to it. And so by the time you go to the FDA, you have to say, here's the product. We built it to this spec. We tested this spec on the benchtop. Then we went to an animal trial. We put it in animals. We looked at the outcomes across this whole range of spectrum, and then we've got the data. You go to the FDA and they say, cool, you changed your system before you put it in the animal. You're gonna have to go back and do the animal again. We need it. We need the animal trial exactly as you're going to put it into the humans. You're like,
right.
I changed this little bit. So you've got all these lined up components. If you change any part of it, you have to sort of go back. So there's this, like, you have to have your full design stack frozen to
Mm,
some level. Then you have to run all of your tests. And if you change anything, because you want to keep improving it, if you change any part of that, you kind of have to go back or make huge justifications. So it's a lot. It just takes time. It's like the manufacturing has to be to a certain standard. Then you have to do benchtop testing to a certain standard. Then you have to run that into an animal. Then you present it to the FDA. Then you take all the feedback, and then you have to, go and plug all the holes. So, and you're talking about with BCI, no one has really solved removability that easily. Removability
mm,
is a big challenge with BCIs. The Holy Grail is that any BCI system will be removable. Everyone would like to do that, but the reality is, no one's solved removability because
mm.
even with cardiac leads are mostly removable, but they get stuck, and it can be quite a problem. So sometimes there's been a lot of media around leaving devices behind in the body, but actually, it's often safer you build them so that they
Right.
can stay in the body and be safe. Trying to pull the thing out can actually be more dangerous, but then you've got upgrade issues.
Yeah. We saw that with implantables. I remember the first question doctors would ask is, how do I get it out? And I
Yeah.
thought that was a crazy question. We're like, we just put a great device in. But we've seen that with, cuff leads. We've seen that across all of neuromodulation and devices is it's probably safer to leave a lot of the more core interfaces in there.
Yeah, and I think Second Sight famously, I think that article came out about, the ability to remove the Second Sight device that got a lot of attention.
Yeah. Now with all of these, the BCI races, the call it the brain race. What is the total size of this market? I think there's a lot of companies, so there has to be something out there worth achieving. Where is everyone heading toward, and how big is it going to be in the future?
So I think the initial thinking for the field was this is a small market because you're talking about very severely impaired patients that have locked-in syndrome. That's kind of where the field started. Uh, if you think about what the technology's doing, so typical neuromodulation or neurostimulation devices tend to target an organ, stimulate the organ, which improves symptomatology and therefore fixes the underlying condition, or at least alleviates symptoms of the underlying condition. So what tends up happening with neuromodulation is they're very specific therapies towards an organ in a particular condition. Um, BCI is not fixing the underlying condition. It goes into your brain and it generates a live stream of data out of your brain. kind of like a bypass and enables you to restore autonomy. The word autonomy is being used a lot in implantable BCI now, and it's a
Mm,
powerful word that we don't really haven't typically used before, because how do you improve autonomy? Well, autonomy is decision making. And
mm,
the way that you make decisions in the world is through the expression of your will or volition through the motor system. You speak, you type, you wave, or you like do something to create an decision. So for people who have failing bodies due to a range of conditions, their ability to be autonomous or make decisions is impaired, and you become functionally dependent. So if you take the lens of what are the range of conditions that impair motor function, so motor impairment, and which limit your ability to control certain devices that might improve your autonomy or ability to make decisions like this, then it's a big, massive market. And
mm,
so, what are the sorts of things that cause motor impairment? Well, there's injury, spinal cord injury, head injury. There's congenital problems like cerebral palsy. There's um, uh, neurodegenerative problems like ALS, like Parkinson's disease, a whole host of other neurodegenerative diseases, hereditary ataxias, spinocerebellar ataxias, uh, immunology, multiple sclerosis. So if you start looking down the list, you realize, and there's actually non-neurological conditions as well. So
mm.
it becomes a thing of like, well, if the BCI lets you control technology and technology lets you live your life more independently, what conditions are stopping you from controlling technology?
Mm.
And then as technology develops over time, it's going to be the shifting landscape. So if 15 years ago, there's a robotic, everyone's building a BCI to control a robotic limb, and then it's like, well, I don't know where to buy a robotic limb from. Now it's an iPhone or a smartphone or an
Right.
iPad. What is it in 10 or 15 years? And so sometimes it's like, well, maybe they're not going to be that useful BCIs because technology is going to be so available and everywhere. But I think probably what's going to happen is if there's no dependency on your body to engage with technology and the BCI enables you to do that in a hands-free, seamless, invisible way, I think it's could
That's
be
cool.
profoundly like powerful technology that emerges over time. If you assume it becomes safe, easy to use, removable, effective, people don't want to touch things and people want to multitask. So I think from that perspective, it could like, the investors who are coming to support Synchron are looking at the technology, the ones who hold a long-term vision here, I think are thinking that this has the potential there's no ceiling on where this goes. Like there's this initial application. So that all the conditions I mentioned, we think there's 15 million people who have moderate to severe motor impairment from a range of conditions, 3 million in the US, who we think could benefit from an implantable BCI in this sort of first generational iteration. And, I think for able-bodied people like you or I, we're lucky to have all of our body working. We're not, I don't think we would contemplate it in the first generation system but, I think after 10 or 20 years, I don't think it's crazy that this technology could be contemplated for people who are looking for some level of, improved or enhanced ability to engage with technology. I think an interesting example of that, corollary of that, is the LASIK. Like LASIK,
Mm.
been around for 30 years. It was kind of scary at first, laser on your eyeball, and initially reimbursed for people who have very low levels of vision. But now it's like, well, do you want to wear glasses? You don't really need it. You're not going to get reimbursed for it. Would you pay for it? Yes, you have the procedure, your eye improves, you're engaged with the world in a better way. I wonder if in a couple of decades, people are contemplating elective procedures with BCI where they can always remove it if they want because it lets you perform X task in a way that you can't do with your normal body.
Yeah, I think you guys have done some of those validations on patients already. Can you highlight some of the outcomes that you've had so far in your
Yeah.
patients?
Yeah. So our system, our system, we took on a model of trying to achieve manufacturing scalability and ease of delivery that was going to deliver a first product to market quickly, which would be scalable. So we didn't take on the massive challenge that the other companies that are following us now are doing, which is getting to massively high channel counts and creating very challenging electronics components. We have chosen pragmatic manufacturing techniques that are going to be able to scale. So the question has been, what can we achieve from the constraints of the size of the blood vessel they're in, the amount of brain that we can capture, and the number of channels that we have? And the number of channels in our first generation system was 16. And now there were certainly some imperfections in that first generation system on account of noise. We had noise leaking into the system, but it was still good enough with what we've shown to get to a scroll and click level of functionality. So the first gen system does not have full two-dimensional mouse trajectory control around the screen. But if you recall the scroll and click functionality of the iPod before the iPhone came out with the click wheel,
Right.
um, that's about the level of functionality that our users are getting. And it turns out that scroll and click functionality works beautifully with Apple because Apple has that history and they have a accessibility feature on their device called switch control and assistive touch that lets that degree of functionality turn into a use case. So the goal is
Wow.
we will have a training app to learn how to, and that's what we achieved with our first gen system. We've got a 10x better, less noisy system, high performing manufacturable system that's now going to be rolled out. It's coming off the manufacturing line now, will be rolled out for the pivotal trial. So we're going to see what the ceiling of performance is, but we are excited that we've already shown a level of performance in our first gen system that's going to be life-changing for people who've lost control of their iPhones. And we're
Wow.
focused on iOS. We're loving working with the Apple system, with the ecosystem, and we've got some exciting news coming up actually in the next couple of weeks on that topic.
Ooh,
Uh, and yeah,
great, great. And then, last question here. You talked about the future and beyond. We talked about the what we're dealing with now and the potential of having all of us with an augmented capability of interacting with technology. Yeah, I'm sure some of that has to do with what you started your work with NVIDIA. Can you explain a little bit of what that looks like and how you see maybe AI jumping into the reality of this platform?
yeah. So we've had a 6 to 9 month, maybe even longer now, almost 12-month formal relationship with NVIDIA, and it's been in a bunch of different directions, but they kind of put the question to us, what does a specialized foundation model look like in BCI? And so we've been asking ourselves that question a little bit. Another way to phrase that question is, what do um, generative pre-training, unsupervised learning techniques applied to intracranial brain data sets that have both temporal and spatial dimensionality? Temporal meaning over time, and then spatial meaning more regions in the brain. And it turns out that over the last 18 months, there's been some really interesting papers coming out. There's this field emerging called neuro AI, especially at NeurIPS. The NeurIPS conference there's a field emerging. Mariam Shinechi's been very active. There's a few other academics. And there's been a couple of papers. One paper that we noted, interestingly, called BRANT, B-R-A-N-T, BRANT 1 and 2. It was a conglomerate of Chinese patients who had stereotactic EEG leads in. And they had recorded over time and they had some temporal resolution. It wasn't thousands of channels, it's like 10 to hundreds of channels.
Mm.
And they showed that applying generative training, so compute, basically applying these generative pre-training techniques, enabled extraction of the brain data of features that weren't otherwise located or found with supervised techniques, like
Oh,
traditional deep learning
mhm.
techniques, which were showing scale hypothesis. Meaning, in other words, meaning whichever company is going to solve the problem of having the most dimensionality over time and location, so unique information out of the brain with labeled data sets, but then fed into compute, are going to start to reveal features that are going to scale and improve over time.
Wow.
And it's profound, I think, because it means that the feature sets, you can't predict what feature sets you're going to find. Now, it raises a bunch of ethical questions about how you do it. It raises questions
Hmm.
about, the FDA is, looking at how you do it. So you have to be very specific with FDA with what training techniques you're using to do.
Mm.
Um, and then it's a question of what are you doing online versus offline. But I'll kind of say this. I think what I've come to realize, and we're playing with this concept of cognitive AI, because what we've come to realize is, or think about is, like in your brain, like we're having a conversation right now, there's like apex level of conscious thinking. But you've
Hmm.
got you've got a bunch of parallel, you know, narratives bubbling between the surface. Maybe you're thinking about something you had to
Sure.
do, or something that someone said to you, or something that's been bothering you, or a range of narratives. And then as you go through your day, your brain is this big prediction machine with different parts of the brain built to react and predict to certain elements of things. If BCI ends up having wide coverage in the brain and in real time starting to understand and make predictions of, well, this part of the brain went off in that circumstance, this means that you want to react like this, then the BCI is going to start to be able to predict and understand how you might want to react in certain environments and what information is going on in your brain.
Mhm.
So what we've reflected on, so the detection of prediction or intention is the purpose of the BCI. What's happening with AI now is the movement away from the generative stage into these action-oriented layers, agentic AI and physical AI, robotics AI, where
Wow.
you can have predictions of intention, you feed them right into action-oriented AI, and it starts doing stuff for you.
Mm.
So what if it was that over time, the BCI starts to predict your predictions or predict your intended actions given an environment and go off and act for you?
Mm.
And
Wow.
so I'll give like a little example is we're in the part of the brain where we can see some error detection. In fact, error detection is a very well understood feature in the brain, even with EEG. Like the P300 is an oddball paradigm where if something weird happens, your brain goes bing, and
Mm.
you can detect that with EEG. So with error detection, we can see error detection with our system. So this is just one example of like a sort of cognitive feature that could be used in an AI. So if you're typing and you make a mistake, your brain will go bing. And if you can detect that, should the AI just delete the word? Should it offer to delete the word? Should it just let you delete the word yourself? But it's already predicted that you're typing right now. I know you're typing and you just made a mistake. So should it, so then it's like, so that's a token. Like a token is a piece of information in context that has relevance that can then be used to guide some another layer. So the way we're thinking about cognitive AI is like intention to action.
Wow.
Now, raises a whole bunch of ethical considerations. Like, well, I don't want AI just to be going off my subconscious whims,
Sure.
obviously. Or do I? Or do I? Or do I actually, on certain domains, want to open it up and say, yeah, go and deal with that for me. Let me know when it's done. It's like, oh, I saw you were thinking about this thing and I went and did this. Like, is that cool? You're like, yeah, that sounds good. So I think, the concept of cognitive AI is that step one is in BCI is solving the kind of more narrow windowed inference challenges. And then as context improves, as the BCI starts to understand the way that you operate in the world and how you react to things, it starts to help you, do stuff. So, I think that's the world we're going to.
Wow. Prediction and being able to guess what we're doing next, you could see that unravels, big consequences, driving, interaction with the vehicles, phones, military, all the above. I'm sure you've been thinking about it. But Tom, it's been
And
great to have you.
and just one more thing on that, Chad. Like you then immediately go to, because there's been this whole narrative in there's a narrative in BCI around the need for BCI to solve the AI alignment problem, which
Mm,
is this idea that as AI gets to AGI and gets to ASI, that humans are going to become, a second order species.
mm,
And the only, not the only, but a solution to that to improve the save humanity or like protect humanity in that transhumanist moment is to solve it with upgrading of our cortical processes. The problem with that theory is that you're using AI inside your brain to solve problems. And actually, we already know that like social media, TikTok, like I'm addicted to YouTube. Like
yeah,
our like dopaminergic structures in our brain are like representative of human imperfections that are weaknesses for humanity. And so if cognitive AI opens up processes which are subconscious but open to addiction, actually, I
yeah,
think AI could actually make us more vulnerable. So I think there's some major ethical concern. And so then you go to, yeah, okay, like human cognitive liberty, human cognitive sovereignty actually needs to be protected. And we're going to have to think deeply on how we open up certain layers here and how we protect humans in the middle here, because we're a
wow.
vulnerable species and
Yeah,
technology, So anyway, I think it's just like there's a lot of thinking to do about where
that's
this
neat.
goes and to get it right.
Yeah, mental health. If, yeah, left to our devices, we'll usually choose an addicting path,
Yeah.
or like you said, the
Yeah.
dopamine addiction there.
But
So
like,
that's
what if,
that's
like,
incredible.
what if the BCI could like actually be aware of your addicting qualities and like give you
Right.
that awareness, So I, there just
Hmm.
there are very different pathways where this technology can go. I watch Black Mirror when I need to like get a little
Yeah.
bit negative on what could
Yeah.
possibly happen, which is I think kind of a insane, gratuitous show. But I think there are some major considerations that we're going to have to deal with. But we did it with genetics. I'm sure we can do it with BCI.
Well, you're right at the forefront of it, Tom, and it's amazing. Years and years of work. I know that you've been built for this, so I appreciate you coming on and talking to all of us about this. Any other last comments?
Chad, I thought you got a company to run.
I've got a few things to do, as do you, and I love seeing it. And good luck out there in the race, Tom.
All right, Chad. Thank you. Good to see you.
Take care.